bring this upteenth meeting of the Port Committee to order. Let's start by going around the room and introduce everybody.
Chuck Casper, Design Manager with ICRC.
Thank you.
Mike Gutierrez, Assembly.
Ernie Hall, Assembly.
Paul Holman, Assembly.
Patrick Flynn, Assembly.
Steve Rebuffo, Port of Anchorage.
Port of Anchorage, Bill Sheffield.
Todd Coles, Port of Anchorage.
The audience too, because I think we'll be asking some people to come forward during the course of this discussion. So Lynn, you want to lead off?
My name is Lynn DeCousian with ICRC.
Brett Flint, ICRC.
Emily Cotter, Port of Anchorage.
Lisa Deemer, Anchorage Daily News.
Raymond Royce, ICRC.
Carl Williams, ICRC.
Diana Carlson, ICRC.
Jim Campbell, P&D Engineers.
Gordon Howlett, P&D.
Nicole Hayes, the Corps of Engineers.
Mary Lee Clementis, Corps of Engineers Regulatory.
Kevin Morgan, Corps of Engineers, Chief Regulatory Division.
Alan Churchill, Operations Branch, Corps of Engineers.
Jim P. Carr, Corps of Engineers.
Julie Anderson, Corps of Engineers.
Richard Burton, Visitor.
Very good. Thank you everybody for coming. We actually had an agenda today, but I think our friends, our stakeholders have taken that and developed some presentations. So let's start with those and move along. Is that okay?
That's fine, and I can kick things off.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who do we have on the phone?
We're expecting the Maritime Administration.
Yeah, they said they were going to call.
I thought I heard someone online. Is everybody online right now?
We are.
Okay.
It's Keith Lesnick from the Maritime Administration. Paul Bouchard. Ryan Kapuscinski, Maritime Administration. And Roger Bonner, Maritime Administration.
All right, welcome gentlemen, and thank you for joining us. If you need to pop up or pop in, please be sure to let us know, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. All right, with that, Todd, go ahead.
Our purpose today really is to touch on three items that we left off with last time, do a more thorough job of discussing those. First being the marine terminal design load criteria. We're then going to discuss the QA/QC quality assurance quality control program, what has occurred and what improvements we're planning on making with that. And then also do a more in-depth discussion about what the core regulatory review associated with our permit meant, what that entailed. So to help with us, to help with that, Lynn DeCousian's I'm going to turn it over to Lynn. She's going to introduce her team members who are the subject matter experts on those issues, and we can take whatever questions might come up.
I'd like to recognize everybody that's on Colonel Koenig. Welcome, Colonel. Good to have you with us. Great to be here. Thank you.
My name is Lynn DeCousian. I'm Program Manager at ICRC, and my job today is only to introduce everybody else who's going to talk. And we'll start off with Chuck Casper, who's the Design Manager at ICRC, and he's going to address the dock load criteria that was a question last time. And then I'll turn it over to Brett Flint, who is the Chief Engineer for ICRC, and he's going to discuss QC and QA at the port. And then Chuck, again, will talk about technical reviews of the design. During the introductions, you saw Jim Campbell and Garth Howlett sit with P&D Engineers, the engineer of record for the project. They are in the audience, and if we have some technical questions that we need the support from them on, then either Chuck or Brett will ask Garth or Jim to weigh in. Thank you.
We had 2 or 3 other people come in beside the colonels. Is the information there, identify themselves?
Sure. Folks in the back who just showed up, would you kindly introduce yourselves? Yeah.
It's Pat Richardson with the Public Affairs Office at the Army Corps of Engineers.
I'm Tom Fidner. I'm also with the Public Affairs Office for the Corps of Engineers.
And I'm Barbara Jordan, I'm the Civil Servant.
Excellent. Thank you very much for being here. Interested observer. Just keeping an eye on
Two most important members in the audience.
All right. Go ahead, Chuck.
Here you say that.
Okay, what we have here on the slide is load ratings for the new facility. These are for normal operations. Increased loads can be accommodated provided that they're evaluated in advance. That's a common standard practice. These particular ratings do exceed the ratings for the existing dock, and these are pretty much in line with industry standards.
So, quick question. And you say they exceed the existing dock by how much roughly, or do you know?
Well, the uniform load of 1,000 pounds per square foot.
It's about a 50% increase over the existing. The existing facility is 600 PSF uniform load.
So is this at
right at the dock, or is it back, including the areas that are backfilled?
This live load applies to the edge of the wharf.
Okay, and are you going to give us information about the other area, I'm assuming later on, where the storage would be?
Yeah, I think we can discuss how these loads then are combined with other loads to actually perform the structural analysis. So we just wanted to first, here are the live loads. Here are the base design live loads. Our next slide is going to be the seismic criteria, and then we can have a further discussion about, which P&D might have to help us with, how those loads go in combination to actually analyze the structure.
I want to apologize. As you can tell from the questions I've asked, I don't have any engineering background at all. And you're going to have to be pretty specific with me, I guess, so I understand you. I don't quite know what live load criteria even means. My basic concern and question was, can you stack trailers when you go back a little bit for storage? Or are our customers going to have to drive way back in order to, that was my concern.
No, these loads give us confidence that we'll be able to operate the facility the way our stakeholders need to operate. So if we don't normally exceed 1,000 pounds per square foot, which is, again, quite a bit more than our existing facility, but will account for stacking of containers and other specific vehicle loads. Anything outside of this norm, we would analyze special. That's our standard practice today. Wherever we exceed the standard design load, we do a special analysis. So we have confidence that these will meet the needs of our stakeholders.
Thanks, Todd.
Okay.
The operating load of 1,000 pounds per square foot, that'll be throughout the facility. As a general matter of course, in modern shipping, they try and keep the area adjacent to the ships pretty clear so they have access to the ships. Most of the stacking goes on a couple of 100 feet back and beyond. Let's see. This slide shows the conditions that the structure is built to withstand. And with that during static loading, that's basically the dead load and the live loads without any effective earthquakes. And short-term static is during construction. Long-term static is after construction is done. That's during normal operations. We have these performance criteria for earthquakes. We have the operating level earthquake and the contingency level earthquake, the maximum considered earthquake. The operating level is the smallest, the maximum considered is the largest. With the OLE, the operating level earthquake, we expect some minor damage, but there's no interruption operations. Basically, go around and do some patching, but port's still operating. Contingency level earthquake, there's some damage. It's minimal. There's minimal operations to the port operations. Then with the maximum considered, there's more damage with some interruption to operations. Maximum considered earthquake, the essential facilities at the north end and the south end are built to withstand the maximum considered earthquake. The center portions are going to be constructed to meet the CLE criteria, the contingency level earthquake.
Mr. Gutierrez has a question.
Excuse me, this is Sharon Wicker from NARAD. Is it possible for the speakers to speak closer to the microphone?
Or is it a microphone?
Indeed it is.
I guess I can speak louder.
Thank you.
Yeah, we need to.
Trying to move that. You got it, Mr. Terry?
We're going to remove all of it.
That's a microphone, right?
Will that reach over there? Yeah, it looks like it.
Hold on, Mike.
We're working it.
Yeah.
Here, ready? You got it. Okay. Walk it over there.
Need that one? Oh, I see, no, we need this one.
So keep it our goal.
Sorry.
Chuck, you want to give her a test, make sure it works?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sounds great.
Okay, good.
So I wondered if you could, when we talk about seismic activity, there are two ways that generally, those of us who aren't engineers, as Ms. Osiander nor I are engineers, think of it. One is in sort of a Richter scale, how big an earthquake. The other is you know, a 5-year event, a 10-year event, a 100-year event, the size of earthquake we might see on those timescales. Can you relate either of those frames of reference to what we have here in the slide?
Basically, the magnitude goes up. Of course, also magnitude and relative distance to the site is important. Essentially, the return period on the OLE is 1 in 72 years, the recurrence period.
How many, I'm sorry?
72 years.
72 years?
72.
The contingency level is 475.
Okay.
And the maximum considered is 2,475.
So Chuck, to maybe elaborate on that, what we're talking about is we've performed a site-specific seismic analysis.
Yes.
We've looked at faults in the region and what they generally, what quakes generally occur on those faults within a radius of influence of our project. It's important.
Right.
They have varying magnitudes and varying probabilities. We analyze that. We determine what combination of those two, magnitude and probability, relates to those 3 criteria. And we analyze the structure around that. So an operating level earthquake will be a lower magnitude quake. The next, you know, and higher than on the next 2. The radius to the project is important as well. A subduction zone quake out in Prince William Sound, like the 1964 quake, may not necessarily control the design when you look at a lower magnitude quake from a fault closer to the project. So all that's taken into account, and the design addresses that. And so that's what we're trying to communicate here. We expect a performance level from the structure. It's a relationship of magnitude and proximity to the site. And a lower magnitude quake that's a higher probability of occurrence, we don't expect any significant damage whatsoever. Operations continue. Up the chain, then we would tolerate certain deformations and have to make certain repairs. What we expect is that portions of this project will withstand the maximum considered earthquake and remain operational. So that's, I think, the best way I can describe it. Any questions?
Yeah. Chuck, if I might,
Yes.
could you speak to the role of instrumentation in the essential facilities and how that's employed and has been employed through this process?
Actually, for each phase, we'll be installing instrumentation on a certain number of cells, a random sampling of cells, and that's to monitor, you know, throughout the project, consolidation of the clays underneath the fill, and then also the deflections of the sheet pile wall after it's during filling and after filling.
Is that part of the planning process as well, sort of figuring out roughly the density you would need in each facility? The density of instrumentation.
Oh, yes. But these performance levels, these 3 performance levels for seismic conditions, earthquake conditions, those were recommended by the Mayor's Blue Ribbon Commission back in 2004, and that commission was comprised of local experts, nationwide experts, and city officials.
Can I ask a question? You know, frequently now I'm finding that I'm reading material that was prepared some months or years in the past. This has come up several times, and what then I'm presented with is the final resolution, but I guess I want reassurance that the initial questions were resolved before you got there. One of the concerns I thought that the Corps had earlier on was that the seismic testing for the wet barge area on the north extension should use something called facilities instrumentation, and I admit to no knowledge of what that means, but I understood that that was something that came up earlier. How was that addressed?
I think we're going to touch on that on the third part of our presentation.
Okay, so I'm
if we could just move through this,
That's
and
fine,
we'll get to that next.
Anything else on this one?
Just that these performance levels generally conform to industry standards and practices.
Thank you very much. Lynn, are you in the sector? jump into Brett.
Go ahead, Brett.
Walk over here by the speakerphone.
Those online, Brett Flynn from ICRC is now presenting.
Thank you.
What we wanted to address here was last session there were some questions about what kind of quality assurance was in place at the port for the project, how that matched up with quality assurance activities on similar projects. P&D has designed 120 plus or minus sheet pile facilities around Alaska, throughout the country, and foreign countries as well. They did do a sampling. They went back and looked at a number of those, and basically, obviously, different projects have different levels of quality assurance, depending on the size of the project, the importance of the project, whether it's public money or private money. But in general, the project that we had going here was the process we had here is very similar to what has been used elsewhere. Nothing, would be considered industry standard, I would think, for this type of structure. So first we want to talk just a little bit about, you hear about quality control and quality assurance. They're not the same thing. Quality control, commonly referred to in the industry as QC, is the program that the construction contractor themselves develop to control their process. That's how they make sure that they are meeting their obligations under the contract. Quality assurance is where the owner or the developer kind of samples. They go in and they oversee that quality control process to make sure that that is working and functioning correctly. So primarily we're talking about quality assurance, but quality control, they intermix, they overlap, obviously. So the kinds of things that we've done out of the port, we were doing, is the contractor prepares his quality control plan. He prepares plans on how he's going to install the sheet pile. He's going to give us a plan on how he's going to place the soil. And part of the quality assurance program is we review all those. And what we're doing is we're looking at those to say, do they meet the specifications? Do they meet standard accepted industry standards? Is there any fatal flaws that we see in his plan? We're not going to try and tell him how to do his work, but we're going to look at his plan and make sure that it is up to snuff and it meets our expectation. Then we have full-time observation. We have people out there all the time. Whenever there's work going on, we have people on site. They're documenting the construction activities. They're watching what's going on. They've been trained by the engineer what to look for. And on this project, we had P&D, the engineer of record, they had people on site pretty much every day. Not full-time, but they had a presence out there almost every day. Whenever there was an issue or a problem, that presence was increased. Garth's truck probably found its way to the port a lot easier than it did home sometimes. So the kinds of things we're watching for out there is we're looking at how they're handling the steel, how their templates are being placed, how they're actually placing the steel and driving it. We're looking at whether or not they're hitting the steel in the right place. We have surveyors. Construction contractor has his own surveyors. We have surveyors under contract to us that come in and check the locations of the steel. We're looking at their driving rates. We're looking at how their equipment is performing. We're documenting weather conditions, anything unusual that goes on. And this all is just part of the project record. We're making sure that we're meeting our obligations under regulatory permits and things like that. Then we review the contractor's records. He keeps daily reports and he gives them to ICRC, and ICRC looks at those. And our QA people look at those. And we will look at that and we'll say, hey, is there anything here that seems amiss to us that we need to go back and look at? And as a result of that, sometimes we will make recommendations, or the engineers will make recommendations to go in and look at something closer. And that's really what happened, and that's how these problems were found. Because the engineers were looking at some of these driving records and they said, boy, we're getting some pretty high blow counts. There's a lot of energy going into some of these sheet pile, and we really got to go take a closer look at those. So then if there's a problem or a non-conforming work is identified, then the process is, first of all, you got to figure out how to correct the problem. And then we go back and we look at the QC program and the QA program. We say, okay, do we need to do anything different based on what we know now? So we have done that. We've looked at our program and we've said, okay, is there anything we can do differently to maybe ensure that we don't have these kind of problems going forward? And this is an evolving process. Some of these things are in place now. Some of these are being planned and will be in place for future work. But we've, instead of using subcontractor people on site, ICRC's gone out and hired our own inspectors and our own quality assurance inspectors so that we have direct control. It's not that we have more people out there, they're just ICRC employees now rather than subcontract employees. We're going to increase the level of tracking on the energy that's being used to place these sheets, because that hopefully will correlate to whether or not there is damage. That's for vibratory pile driving. What we look at is how long it takes, how long the hammer is on that sheet, how long it takes it to move a certain distance, how many inches it goes in a minute, how many, something like that. That equates the amount of energy that hammer is putting into the steel. When we're using an impact driver, that's like a hammer. We just count how many blows it takes to drive that sheet a certain distance, and that again is an indicator of the energy going into that sheet. We're going to increase the actual physical inspection of the sheets. And this is, one of those things where it's a trade-off, because this is going to slow things down, but we're going to actually have the contractors, after they drive the sheets, we're going to have them pull a few sheets here and there, a random sampling to make sure that we're not seeing damage there. And these kind of activities did occur in this last project. They weren't regular, but we did pull sheets for other reasons, and a lot of sheets we pulled had no damage. In fact, almost all the sheets that were pulled in this process, we had a few cells that were not quite in the right location, and we pulled those sheets out, and they were clean. They were very good. There was no damage there. So we're also looking at whether or not there are technologies that we might be able to use to determine whether or not there's any damage to the sheets without having to pull them. And we haven't found a whole lot. There is a couple of things we're looking at that would be taking a technology that is used someplace else and applying it to this application. So it would be a little bit of R&D there, but we are looking to see if there's some way we could do that to improve that process. And we've also looked at actually modifying our specifications. The specifications that were used originally were fairly broad. That's industry standard. We tell the contractor what he wants we want him to build, and we tell him what kind of site conditions he can anticipate, and let him figure out how to perform his work most efficiently. So what we're now doing is saying, instead of saying, you ought to think about doing certain things, we're going to say you have to do certain things. We're specifically telling the contractors in future specifications that they do have to do some kind of what we call pre-treatment or preparation of these very stiff native soils. The types of things are either a trench, move those stiff soils and backfill with gravel. Again, that's something that has been done on the project to some degree. They can pre-drill, where they bring in a drill rig and actually drill holes where the joints of the sheet pile go, or where the Ys go, to create a pathway. And the method that has been used this last year that actually seems to be fairly efficient and successful is you take a heavy beam, like an H-beam, and that's your standard structural beam, so it's shaped like an H, and you drive that in advance of where the sheet pile goes, so you create a pathway through those soils. Then you pull that beam and then drive the sheet pile. And that method has been tried on site and has been successful. And there again, we drove the sheets, pulled them out, no damage, put them back in. Okay. Any questions on QA?
Just a quick question on if we're finding, we're doing these things all within the scope of the job you've got the job underway, it's under bid, you're watching, monitoring. Obviously we just recently had a road project where someone who was tasked to do certain duties wasn't really paying attention because that wasn't their primary responsibility. If something like that were to happen in this case, let's say a sheet's in the wrong position as you just identified, who's responsible and at what cost? Who has to bear the cost of putting something wrong or damaging something that they should have caught traps under one of these QC?
Well, that's a very good question, and the answer is it depends. I mean, what the determination has to be is, okay, did the contractor do what was in the specification? In the case where he put sheets in the wrong place, it's his responsibility to pull them out and put them in the right place. Now, what the contractor may say is he may come back and say, well, I did it exactly the way I was supposed to, but there was something different about the site. There was what we call a changed site condition that caused the problem. In that case, we have to determine whether or not there actually was a changed site condition. If there's a changed site condition, then typically the owner is responsible for those costs, because the contractor could not have foreseen that condition going into the project.
My follow-up to that is are we seeing either of those scenarios, whether somebody's done something wrong that we've either caught through QA, not actually on QC, or are we finding the site circumstances change?
Those are all being evaluated and being looked at very carefully. I mean, obviously, in a situation like this, every party stands up and says, it's not my fault. And in reality, the truth probably turns out to be somewhere in the middle. We all like to draw an arrow that says because A, then B. But what you find is most arrows have feathers on them. And those feathers are contributing factors that may have, there may have been a dozen different things going on that contributed to that event occurring. And so that's part of the problem we have, is trying to untangle all that and decide who really is truly responsible for making that repair.
Brett, I'm curious, maybe this is a question for the P&D folks, but when you do the pre-drilling, have you found any differences in the stability of the sheet pile once you get it down there?
But we haven't, the pre-driving, we have not. Basically, all we're doing is trying to create a pathway for those sheets. And once those sheets are there, the structure itself is designed to move, and it will take up any play that you find because of that. So it should have no effect at all on the structure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chuck. For those online, Chuck's coming back to the table now.
We'll talk about the next agenda item, and that's the review by the Corps of Engineers. And before we talk about that, let's recap all the technical reviews that occurred on the project. P&D and geoengineers, they were the designers that performed the analysis, and they had their own internal quality control process. Terracon and consultants, the experts, nationwide experts, were the independent reviewers. And the Corps of Engineers reviewed the information submitted to them as required by the plant conditions. So we'll take a look at the interactions between the expansion project and the Corps of Engineers. And it's a little bit busy, but bear with me. So starting with number one, the initial permit was submitted in 2003. The first phase was for 20 acres called the North Backlands. The second phase was for the remainder of the expansion project. You can see the adjacent dredging project. There was an initial review by Erdick. The permit was issued in 2007 and included special conditions related to the design coordination and review of modifications, all which were related driven by the adjacent level dredging project. The Corps reviewed the geotechnical report and final designs for the barge berth and other phases. I know it says 95%, but I should say final, sorry about that. And as a note, the geotechnical report included an analysis, ability analysis for the entire expansions, all the sections, all the phases throughout the entire expansion. Submitted with it were only the final designs for those two initial construction phases, the barge versus the north extension. And the Corps of Engineers found the POA in compliance with the special merit conditions for the construction.
Do I understand it as designs are finalized for other phases, they'll be submitted to the Corps for permits?
They will. I'll get to that.
Are you done now with the Corps discussion?
No.
I had some questions.
Well, I got a few more slides.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe 20 more minutes. Let's see, permit special conditions. If you look in the permit, there's a section called design coordination. This is the meat and potatoes of that section right here. And foremost, it required an analysis of the global and internal structural stability. This is essentially a geotechnical report that was submitted in 2008. The project was developing a geotechnical report anyway. The Corps of Engineers wanted to look at some additional aspects, and the following down here are specific items they asked us to address, such as backfill material. We confirmed likely sources. We tried to keep that very broad for the sake of competition. We developed density criteria. We did evaluate the over dredging by performing additional stability analysis. Essentially, what happens if a dredger dredges a little bit deeper, it's carried away, dredges deeper than it's supposed to, and also to account for the possibility of pockets of scour. We did develop an instrumentation program, which has been implemented, and again, that's to measure the consolidation and the deflection of the sheet pile. Also required was a sensitivity analysis, and we did conduct one. Basically, a sensitivity analysis to take small changes, small variants to the inputs and look for large changes to the outputs. So basically, if you start with a small change here and it causes a big change there, you can tell that something's going on and you can focus on that. Just pay special attention to it. Factors of safety we did conduct. We did select the appropriate levels and perform modeling. And recall at this point in time, this is shortly after Hurricane Katrina. There was a heightened sensitivity nationwide about what are the appropriate factors of safety. Earthquake loading, we developed multiple accelegrams, which are essentially waveforms that simulate earthquake motions. Those were in, and also we had an initial site-specific response study, and then a refined one as new information became available. And all accelegrams that was used as input to the numerical modeling, which is used to predict deflections under earthquake loading and static conditions. Residual shear strength, we did incorporate the test results into the analysis. This recognizes that clay can lose strength due to a large earthquake. As it shakes back and forth, if you shake it long enough with enough energy, you can lose shear strength. In compatible designs, we developed outfalls in the bulkhead and ductility in the dock cap. The idea here is that a large earthquake won't inflict undue stress from one section to another. So we have different criteria. We have the maximum considered earthquake and essential facilities over here, and contingency level earthquake over there. They're going to react a little bit different. They're designed a little bit different. The idea is, since they're connected, not to inflict undue problems. For the future construction phases, we have performed additional field testing and laboratory analysis. This was recommended by the designers and the reviewers. The initial offshore data collection in 2003 by the jackup rig, that wasn't very specific to any particular design. And so when we came up with a final preferred alternative through the NEPA process, we came up with selected a designer and came up with a design. Part of the geotechnical analysis came back and said, well, it'd really be nice to get some additional information to help us verify our particular design, certain aspects of our design. And then also, at the south extension, there was a little bit of a void down there. The jackup rig couldn't go into real shallow water. It could only get part of the south extension portion. So in 2008 and 2009, we went in and did some additional offshore using a barge and also tracked rigs going down the beach and collected some additional downhole information to send to the lab. Let's see, for future phases, we'll update the geotechnical analyses with additional information, which is basically the offshore testing, additional laboratory testing, refined site-specific response study. And we'll be providing with that those updates and 95% level designs for review. Design modifications as-built will be submitted to the Corps. And construction for each phase will not proceed without regulatory approval.
Chuck, it seems that some of the clays that you're encountering as you do your sheet pile driving are somewhat stiffer than perhaps initially expected. How have those, the additional information, how's that been incorporated into this process? Where did it enter the feedback loop, and how's that, what sort of results are we seeing from that?
That's a good question. For the most part, when we have a 1.5 mile long site, and the conditions do change from one end to the other, we are blessed in that the material at depth is competent and can be built upon. We are finding that there are a lot denser materials at the north end. We knew that going into it. It can be debated on how dense is dense, and who knew what when.
We were debating that last night.
But yes, as we move forward, any information that we develop during construction and any other investigations, it's an iterative process, the design process. We try and carry the best information forward and incorporates lessons learned all the way through.
Any more questions for Chuck on this one?
Well, I don't know who to direct the question to. I'm assuming that we're going to have a chance to.
We've got more time, don't worry.
I just point out that one way you tack, how does that, what we've seen, enter back into the feedback loop? That's part of what we've done on the QA side, where we're saying we're looking at our specs and incorporating other means and methods to make sure we accommodate those soils. Like Chuck said, I'm not prepared to say if how hard is hard. Is it harder than we expected? We expected it to be hard. Was it harder than that? That becomes a very esoteric discussion. So.
Well, that's what we have attorneys for. Okay. Anything else on this specific presentation? We have some of our friends from the Corps of Engineers. I presume you work in concert with them in developing this portion of the presentation. Any comments you'd like to make regarding this process? Al, Colonel? You don't have to.
I wouldn't say we necessarily worked in concert, but we did, when the slides were being prepared for this presentation, we did forward them to the Corps for review and comment. They were good enough to give us some comment, and we incorporated the best we can. I think one of the major comments is that we're working between two federal projects, and the Corps has a federal dredging program that they must accomplish. That's their mission. So it's very important that their review, it's in the slide, we may not have brought it out really strongly, but their review is in accordance with that. So.
And the only thing that I would add is, in terms of the working in concert, is that ICRC was the agent for the Port of Anchorage during the permit application process. So their role was to represent the port during our evaluation of the permit application. And of course, they're the ones that we dealt with on a day-to-day basis when we needed additional information for our permit evaluation process.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to just interject here. One of my big concerns has been to try to address the comments that have come to us from our Municipal Geotech Advisory Commission. And the strongest comment they gave us was this request for independent review. And if you recall at the last meeting, I tried to understand, what that had been. I looked at your slide on independent review, and there was the question about, you can argue what is independent, what is not independent, but specifically, there was some confusion, at least on my part, exactly what depth of analysis the Corps had really looked at the material. I note there on the slide that you gave that you're talking about giving them designs at 95% level. Did they review the wet barge area in the north section there at the 95% design level?
That was a mistake on the slide. They reviewed the final designs. And in the normal course of things don't change very much between 95% and 100%. Or at least they better not.
I'm sorry, they did review the final?
Yes, they did.
Okay, because I probably got early information in, because I got a document that had comments from a 35% level.
Well, they did an initial review before the permit was issued.
Okay.
There was coordination going on back and forth over the years, early on, and then, of course, after the permit was issued, we submitted the report.
Okay, has the copy of their 95 or final review ever been presented to the Geotech Advisory Commission?
Not that I know of.
That was a request we made at the last meeting.
The culmination of that review amounted to a letter from the Corps of Engineers stating that we had come to an agreement on that portion of the project and were therefore permitted to proceed. That letter is available on the project website. We certainly can forward that to the GAC if they aren't aware of that, but it has been out there for some time.
Well, what they...
Colonel, do you want to? Yeah, ma'am, I want to make sure everybody's clear here, and my team, correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to make sure it's clear that this review is with an eye toward the Clean Water Act and the regulatory function the Corps of Engineers has as far as the Clean Water Act and the federal dredging project. This review has nothing to do with the constructability, the appropriateness, the engineering aspects of the project itself. Okay?
Oh, okay.
So is that clear?
It was not clear initially, no.
Absolutely. That's clear now.
That's correct, sir.
That's correct. So whether the project fails or does not fail, it has nothing to do with this review. This review has everything to do with the Clean Water Act and the ability of the Corps to dredge up to, I think it's 5 foot on the face. Yes. Okay. Once it's completely done, once all phases of the project are done. It has nothing to do with validating whether it's
That's really too bad.
Now, we could have done that if we were asked to, but we were not asked to. So just want to make sure that was
Well, it
clear.
appears that in the future there is a plan to do that. Is that, did I read the slide correctly? On the quality analysis, we were talking about future.
Essentially, the geotechnical report provided analysis for all the phases, all the future phases.
Yeah.
But we're going to go back and do some revisions with the new information to make sure we have it tweaked. And there will be additional reviews on that. The approval that we got from the regulatory division, that was specific to the barge burst and north extension.
Well, I was looking at your future quality control slide. I'm looking for it right now. I'm sorry. Improvements, it's called. Quality control and quality assurance.
Slide 7.
And the way I interpreted that, maybe it's the one before. I interpreted that as that you were going to be presenting the new construction to the Corps for analysis beyond just the clean water interpretation. Did I interpret that incorrectly?
I guess we...
It looks like 12.
11 or 12? Slide 11. This review that we're discussing was specifically to comply with a permit condition. And I don't have that condition in front of me, but that first bullet of this slide indicates that it was a required analysis of the global and internal structural stability. These are all the factors that analysis took into consideration. I guess maybe I don't understand how this only applies to the Clean Water Act. There are engineering parameters that were evaluated. We have correspondence between the Corps and the project team on these issues. It was a rigorous analysis, and all we want to do is present what occurred. Whether it was an independent technical review or not, we weren't really here to argue. We just wanted to state this is what occurred.
Well, I'm not intending to be argumentative. I apologize if I'm sounding argumentative. I'm just trying to be responsive to what the Municipal Advisory Commission requested. And so I'm trying to further what I'm hearing as their big questions and concerns. And I thought that the analysis was or the response was that both Terracon and the Corps had provided the independent review, and it appears that that's at least somewhat true.
Mr. Flint, did you want to try to step in?
Is that
The issue, the issue really is,
I want to walk around the table so you're close to the microphone for the Marion folks, please.
and this issue has been there for a long time.
okay?
And ICRC as the project team, you know, we heard that. We heard that there's concerns about having independence review. As the developer, there's only so much we can do. That's why we have Terracon on site. We had a panel of 5 independent PhDs that were retained that reviewed various aspects of the project. We have P&D has checks and balances built into their system, and you know, these reviews are not rubber stamps. You know, these were long, drawn-out, bloody conversations about some aspects of the design.
And on a video?
Sorry. We don't. But what the GAC is saying is they don't believe that to be independent. And there's nothing else that the ICRC or the Maritime Administration really can do, because if I go out and fund another review, it's going to be the same thing. And it's not going to be necessarily viewed as being independent. My understanding is what the GAC is saying is for something to be completely independent, it has to be outside of this existing project envelope. And the question is, how do you do that?
Well, I think my understanding of the request is there just has to not be financial ties between the two companies, or the two entities.
How do you do that?
I wish that they were here. I should have
Yeah.
called them and made sure that they were going to make it.
And we have said all along.
Okay. Have you
said-
given, I'm sorry.
We've talked to the GAC on a number of occasions, given presentations to them. We do try to keep them up to date on where we're at. And, you know, we have always said we're more than happy to participate in any other review for this project.
Okay. Has any additional information been transmitted to them since our last meeting? Do you know?
This is our last meeting here.
Since the last port committee meeting?
We had a informal meeting with them in late November to discuss seismic instrumentation, plans for that in the future. We haven't had any substantive conversations on this issue with them.
Mr. Gutierrez, you have a question?
Yeah, forgive me, because I'm having trouble recalling from our last meeting. I didn't memorize the organizational chart, the flow chart that was presented. Who is Terracon?
Terracon is a nationwide engineering firm, completely independent from P&D. They have no ties to P&D whatsoever. They were involved very early on in the project, and part of the check and balance we did is Terracon did the initial geotechnical work. And then we took that and we gave that to P&D when they were brought on board as the designer and said, okay, you guys review this and take a look at that. And then as P&D has worked through their design, we've had Terracon review that.
So the only financial tie between the two is related to this project.
It is through ICRC. They are both contracted to ICRC.
Okay.
But that is our internal process to try and make sure that this design process does have a check and a balance and has some peer review going on as it goes forward. The core review, that was a review. And nobody ever said that it was supposed to be an independent review or that they were reviewing it to be, you know, certified the design, that it was a fairly rigorous, in-depth review. There was a lot of information that went back and forth. There was a lot of questions asked. And I think they did an outstanding job of looking at it. They brought forward concerns that were incorporated into the final design. So it added value to the project in a number of ways.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
One more. There's no point in going backwards, really. But considering the challenges right now with the sheet pile that we're seeing, the problems with the sheet pile, is it your intent to do is it your intent to do any additional engineering analysis of, I guess what you're saying, if I can paraphrase from some of these slides, is you're saying that you're going to be going through some of these specific analysis. You're going to use the H beams to drive down because that's worked, but you're not necessarily going to reevaluate the design of the whole structure of the north face at this point.
Well, to reevaluate the design, the overall design, I would say no.
Okay.
The engineers, one of the things they have been asked to do is to look at the issues we found and determine from a technical standpoint what they think is causing that design, that damage. And in that process, as a good engineer would, if there was any design change that came out of that, they would suggest that. I think P&D is pretty confident that their design is a robust design. It has been very successfully in a wide range of different conditions. So why we're running into the issues we're having here, I don't know. That's one of the things we are trying to figure out. We're trying to untangle that in a number of different fronts.
May I add one thing to that, Brett? Is that since we're
Make sure you guys can hear Lynn when she comes around here.
This is Lynn, talking to the speaker. Because we're constructing this project in phases, as we complete a phase or have the experience in the construction aspect of it, we are taking our lessons learned and are folding those into subsequent designs. So if you find something that needs to be tweaked, excuse me, whether it's a design, field modifications and things like that, those are being folded in. Not necessarily major changes at this point, but as per the core permit, significant design modifications will be provided to them for their evaluation for their dredging program, and also will undergo review by Terracon and others as necessary, anything other than small, less significant changes. So we're always making it better as we go through the other phases prior to construction.
Thank you, Lynn. Mr. Rebuffo, did you have a comment?
No, I didn't. I think it was discussed already, so.
Very good, thank you. All right, well, that's all I had for today, unless there are further questions from the committee or any further comments from...
We had an agenda.
We did.
And is it gone?
Well, as I mentioned at the outset, I provided that to our ICRC, to the Corps, and to the Port of Anchorage, and based on that, they collectively came up with this presentation to give to us to address the questions we had coming out of last meetings, or our last meeting, and so that sort of subsumed the agenda as a definition.
So then I do have questions, and there's a gentleman from the Corps that wants to say.
Actually, Alan Churchill and I were planning on giving you a short brief on Corps' role in this project.
Great. Please agree. Come on up.
And then, Mr. Chairman, the other concern I had is I thought we were going to get an additional report on the damage for the sheep house.
That was my...
Okay. We'll see if we have anything on that after these gentlemen give their presentation.
We're going to sit down. We'll have PowerPoint presentations
And you just kindly
to bring in some talking points.
you just briefly give your names into the microphone so the Marriott folks know who you are.
I apologize. I didn't bring enough coffee for everybody in the room. I have 3 more, 2 more maybe.
Why don't you leave one here, and anybody who wants one will get one or staff there.
Here, I've got enough for each. All right. Hopefully I'll nothing to talk about.
Can I have a fill?
You got it. I'm Kevin Morgan. I'm with the Corps of Engineers, Alaska District. I'm the chief of the regulatory division.
I'm Alan Churchill with the operations branch of the Army Corps of Engineers.
Morning, it's nice to meet you, Mr. Churchill. It's good to see you again.
Thank you. I'm going to speak first of all to what the Corps' involvement and responsibilities with the Port of Anchorage expansion project were. As many of you may be aware, the Corps has regulatory authority under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act and Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899. Section 404 requires that you obtain a permit from us for discharging dredged or fill material into waters of the United States. Section 10 requires that you obtain a permit from us if you are placing structures or doing work in a navigable waters of the United States. So the port expansion clearly required permits from us under Section 404 and Section 10. Speaking of the process, we got a complete application for the expansion in 2006. I think it was January 18th, 2006. And we immediately on January 19th, 2006, issued a public notice to solicit comments from the public, interested agencies, anybody else that wants to comment on our permit applications. Anytime we get an application that has the potential to impact a federal project, we coordinate those with our operations branch, because we cannot issue a permit if that proposed project would interfere with the federal project. So that is why the Corps was involved, and now Alan is going to speak to what his involvement was in ensuring that this project was not going to interfere with the federal project.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me back from the time I was here before explaining what dredging was. Today I'm going to take you back a little bit to some historical reasons why the Corps gets involved in some of these things. We have a navigation mission to the country. That mission statement is on the handout there under paragraph 2, and that's to provide safe, reliable, efficient, effective, and environmentally sustainable waterborne transportation systems for the movement of commerce, national security needs, and recreation. So that, we go back to that, and then how do we get involved? Well, Congress authorizes the Corps to build various projects around the country. The dredging project at the Port of Anchorage, seaward of the dock, is such a project that was authorized back in the 50s. It's one of the few projects, I think maybe the only project in the nation where the Corps actually dredges right up to the dock. So when the discussions began back in, I guess it was 2004 or 5, about a new project, we were authorized in 2005 by Congress to participate in the expansion process with the dredging, what we call the transitional dredging. We discussed all that back in our previous presentations. And in 2006, in August, I believe it was, there was a series of design discussion meetings that the Corps and the ICRC and the port folks were having about the project coming up. The Corps had a responsibility to provide what we call a decision document as to how we were going to perform this transitional dredging internally. So we had some things we had to put together in the operations branch to satisfy the higher headquarters before any funding could be released to us to do any dredging. So we had some questions that we needed to have answered. And in that meeting, actually it was the 17th of August, I have some minutes here, I asked 3 questions. The first one was, what is the characterization of the material to be dredged on the north and south ends of the new berthing areas so that our dredging contract specifications can be written? So we had the responsibility to do the dredging. We had to put a contract together. We had to be able to tell the contractor what kind of material he was going to encounter when he got out there to start the work. Second part was, to what extent will the phased construction increase siltation rates such that modifications to the type and or number of dredges needed to maintain the port during and following the expansion project could be determined? So with the phased construction, we had all these corners. We kind of went through that last time, where it's going to silt in. And we knew that we were going to have some problems trying to keep those areas open, especially in the summertime and more recently in the wintertime, so that the commerce could move. The last question, and probably for this discussion today is the most important that we asked, was how close to and how deep can these dredges work without affecting the structural and seismic stability factors of the new dock structure? Because we knew that we were going to be dredging up to the dock face. We wanted to make sure that the designers knew how deep we were planning on dredging, how deep the possible scour could be from the natural environment, and just our dredging practices themselves. We have an authorized depth we dredge to. We typically dredge a little deeper than that to make sure we get to that depth. We also perform a little advanced maintenance for the periods of the year where we can't dredge. And then, of course, nature itself can come in and actually scour it out even deeper than that. So we want to make sure that whatever we did there wasn't going to impact or compromise the design and the structure after it was all completed. So what happened then after that, this was August, the ICRC group, which they presented pretty much their timeline here, it was in the November, a few months later, that we got their initial design, what we call the 35%. We had our Engineer Research Development Center in Vicksburg perform the evaluation review, which is basically looking at the assumptions that went into their design, their computations, their analysis, so forth. And there was some dialogue between our folks in Vicksburg, the ICRC team, Terracon, back and forth. And then in December, we finalized those comments. I think we sent them in a letter dated in January of 2007, which I think you all have seen or should have seen. And that was the initial, I guess, point where we had the discussions begin, which subsequently included into or worked into the report that we talked about, or that Chuck was talking about earlier, that was prepared, the study that was done to fulfill the permit conditions that were imposed as part of that permit when it was issued in 2007. So that's basically our involvement. We wanted to make sure that we could maintain the structure without having to worry about, you know, if we got too close or didn't go as deep as we wanted to, we're going to impact anything. So that's how operations. We're kind of the internal watchdog, if you will. We review the public notices just like anyone else would for any potential impacts to our federal projects that we maintain around the state.
Okay,
Go ahead, Ms. O'Shean.
right, this 07 letter, if I got the correct letter, it talks about reviewing level of detail providing on it talks about 35% completion, and I thought that meant 35% completion of the design. Is that correct?
Yes.
But we were just told that you actually did 100% design.
Well, we went through it went back and forth, you know, until we got to the final design.
When somebody submits a permit application to us, our regulations specifically state that they do not have to provide us final engineering plans. So it's very common for us to get either conceptual plans or some plans that are at some percentage of design to evaluate the permit application process. Because typically, you know, of course, we are not reviewing the design and regulatory division. Our responsibility is to assess the impacts to the aquatic environment and to ensure that navigation is not impaired. But you know, as we've indicated, when it is adjacent to a federal project, such as the maintenance dredging project, that is when we get Alan's input and then other input that is needed from other offices in the Corps of Engineers.
Well, okay, have all these issues been resolved on the 07 letter when you finally?
Yes.
Everything's been resolved. Okay.
And I was going to speak to that. As Alan indicated, the permit was issued in August of 2007 with special conditions that are specific to the design coordination center. And as ICRC indicated in their slides, continued coordination of design is required, and that's to ensure that our requirements are met, not only under Section 404 and Section 10, but also to ensure that there will not be any adverse impacts to the federal dredging project. Of course, the Special Condition 6, which is the design consideration special conditions, state that require a final analysis of the global and internal structural stability of the open cell sheet pile structure under static and seismic conditions, and those had to be submitted to us a minimum of 2 months prior to sheet pile installation activities in 2008. In April of 2008, the Port submitted the Port of Anchorage Intermodal Expansion Project Marine Terminal Development Geotechnical Report, that's a mouthful, volumes 1 and 2 for the barge bursts and the north extension phases. We coordinated that with ERDIC, our Engineering Research and Development Center. And on May 30th, 2008, and I think you have copies of these letters, we sent a letter to the Port of Anchorage after ERDIC's review of the 2008 Geotech report, and we stated that ERDIC has determined the submitted geotechnical report does not represent a final stability analysis as required by the permit condition. We did not consider the project to be in compliance with the special condition at that time.
I haven't seen a copy of that.
I'm sure we can get copies for you.
Yeah. I keep a file. I like it.
We can get you a copy.
Sure. We'll get that taken care of.
So subsequent to that, a meeting was held at ERDIC's offices in Vicksburg, Mississippi on June 18th and 19th, 2008. Port of Anchorage's geotechnical and design consultants were present, and as a result of that meeting, after the discussions, and we were given the feedback that ERDIC was satisfied with the information that had been presented to them, Regulatory sent a letter to the Port of Anchorage stating that the barge burst and north extension were in compliance with the requirements of the permit special conditions. Finally, any modifications to design and footprint of a permitted project require coordination with us and potentially modification of our permit. Special Condition 6, number 2 of the existing permit specifically requires coordination of design for core review for purposes of doing our evaluation required under Section 404 and Section 10, and then also so that we can coordinate those with Allen to ensure that it's not going to affect their dredging operations.
Mr. Morgan, over the course of the last 6 months or so, I'm aware that there's been some discussion of extending the north extension a little further south in order to accommodate safe navigability for tow reaching its vacation home, as I like to refer to it. Do I correctly presume you folks have been looped in that discussion?
Nicole or Mary Lee would have to speak to that. I don't.
By all means.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. I'm Julie Anderson with Operations Branch. And
Julie, I'm sorry, could you come closer to the microphone so the mayor can hear you? I want to make sure they're getting all the information they need.
I think as a result of the Corps briefing you in mid-July last year, we've been sitting at the working group with the Port of Anchorage and discussing phasing plans. I think those are still in the preliminary stages. So I don't think that's something that's been looped into regulatory per se, but we have been sitting on that working group trying to make sure that the water side dredging aspect is working with that side.
In other words, you're comfortable we have the appropriate channels of communication open this time?
I think so. I think as we're going forward, we're going to probably have regulatory sitting in on that group as well, and maybe some other folks to make sure that we're connecting that link as well. So I think there's still some improvements to do there.
To the extent the Assembly has any say in that, I would encourage that occurring sooner than later.
Bravo to communication.
All right, thank you very much, Shirley, I appreciate it. Mr. Morgan, anything to add?
That's it for me.
Mr. Churchill? Any questions for the Corps from the Assembly from the Corps today?
I guess it's to all entities here, probably at the table, to the Corps specifically. Have there been any identified problems or issues that still need to be addressed or corrected? I guess that's the question that's on my mind. I mean, I noticed that some of these are rather letters, and I think Ms. Osanna was probably getting to some problems that have been identified early on. There's some damage to the sheet pile, things like that. Are there anything that we haven't, I guess, we don't know about that we would know about unless somebody said it, that need to be addressed and haven't been corrected or addressed?
I think there was the only thing that was.
Right. I mean, I think that's what we were waiting for, some sort of report on that.
We'll get the question to Lynn here.
This is Nicole Hayes. Yeah. She's the chief of our Anchorage field office in the regulatory division.
I think the only thing that was identified that we in regulatory had a concern about was when they were pulling the sheet piles as they were identifying problems, that material was sloughing and impacting the federal dredging project. So we did coordinate non-compliance language. They have resolved, and there's no outstanding issues at this time.
Thank you very much,
and then I just, to summarize for me, and I don't think I have anything further, is that, you know, we pretty much started down this road on this big massive project that, you know, I don't know what the dollar figure in the is going to be, but it's a huge logistics. And my hats are off to the engineering community and at all levels for the checks and balances. It's got to be an onerous task, to say the least. And so I'm just, you know, we have to have a level of trust, and I think people have a level of trust in our government, particularly through our branch, to make sure that we're accounting for the money spent. And unfortunately, in government projects, we all know that we typically, the public has an eye on low bid. We always want to go as low as we can go. And unfortunately, it doesn't always match up with getting the best possible or best available. So I just caution us all to kind of make sure that we're getting a port that's going to be solid and serviceable and efficient and effective, and basically that, you know, 5-10 years down the road, somebody doesn't come back and say, well, geez, if somebody had been paying closer attention and we're just asking the right questions. I just don't want to be in that room somewhere one day or have to be held to the standard to say, you didn't even ask, you didn't bother to ask. And so I want to make sure we ask those questions, and communicating is good. And frankly, you know, I think I've mentioned, and Mr. Wilfo had mentioned earlier, probably the same year of birth as the port originally. I remember as a younger boy sitting down there watching the little pilings being drove through, not the little ones, the big ones, of the existing port, and damaged after the earthquake years. And you know, that port, like me, needs a lot of renovation and work. And the engineer, the design.
He turned 50 today. He won't let us get away. He's having a birthday.
Anyway, bottom line is, thank you for all your work and thank you for the information.
Thank you, Mr. Honeman. And Lynn, you've heard sort of the inquiry. Do we have any updates on how we're doing on our inspection and remediation of the sheet pile that was driven in previous years? Beyond what you gave us last time.
We've taken our inspection program as far as we can take it at this point. There's some additional inspection along tail walls that we are recommending and working with P&D on the plan to do that, verify that they are okay or not, and we're still working on how to move forward with that in the spring and in 2011. So we know what we know up to this point. All the face sheets have been inspected on the water side with underwater dive inspections, and then some of the tail walls have been inspected by removal, and we've got a tally on some of those. We do not have that for all of the open cell sheet pile cells that have been installed up to this date. So we are making plans to continue that process and evaluate everything out there. Verify okay, or whether additional work needs to be done.
Do we have a recalculated cost and time for completion, or based on your analysis?
For
just the north terminal on the wet barge?
For the north end?
North extension.
North extension, we call the we're using terminology north end being the wet barge berth and the north extension as a whole.
Okay, the whole then.
Yeah, the north part.
The north part.
Right. At this point, we don't, a lot of it has to do with our plans going forward to pull all those together. So we're working with the Port and the Maritime Administration to come up with the estimates now. As far as continuing forward, we really need to have the full picture of the status of all the sheet pile that is out there, and that will help fold into any future cost estimates.
I'm sorry, I thought you said that you did have now an analysis of the sheet pile done.
We have partial analysis, some parts of it are complete, and we still have additional that we do want to do to verify the remaining parts.
Let's simplify this a little bit. Would you kindly provide us with a couple-page write-up of sort of here's the sections we've done and how much we've done of them. Here's sections we haven't done and how much we intend to do.
I think we can provide something like that to you. Make it clear, because I know I'm talking generalities right now.
My fundamental question, though, is when will we be finished with the whole we're working on now, and how much is our cost estimate going to change because of the damage that we found in just fairly recently within the last 6 months?
It's a very good question. I don't have the answer for you
Can you give
quite
me an
yet.
estimate when you might have an answer? 6 months, 2 months, 1 month?
I'd say perhaps 6 months. That's part of some of the conversations with the Port and the Maritime Administration as the way to go forward. I know you're looking for information. Some of the things we need to figure out how we're moving forward in 2011. We've got a lot of options and ways to do this with the best cost, best quality, and in the best scheduled time frame. So the short answer is, I would estimate within 6 months, and I'm looking at Todd and the governor right now because they're the ones who really provide those final numbers. So I think that's a good time frame, potentially sooner.
The final numbers on
Well, ICRC makes recommendations, and we pull together numbers from our standpoint. They're not necessarily the entire program numbers that would come from the Port or from the Maritime Administration.
Still, I'm sorry I'm monopolizing here, I'm trying to understand. You still, my understanding though is you're the contract manager basically. You're the people who are in charge of this project in terms of controlling the schedule. Is that wrong or right?
We make recommendations. ICRC is the program manager, but we make recommendations based upon the Port providing requirements and the Maritime Administration providing direction to ICRC. We provide construction and engineering recommendations, and we don't make the final decision.
Todd, you want to try and step on?
Yeah. What we're trying to do right now, we're in the throes of, with MARAD and ICRC, is taking what we do know about the extent of the damage and forecasting the next 2 to 5 years, sequencing the work to in a manner that we can move forward with information we do know, achieve certain goals like completion of the barge berth area and a rail extension. We're hoping to be able to achieve that in 2012. We haven't confirmed that. We're still in that process. We actually are expecting a visit from the Maritime Administration next week, where we hope to be able to finalize the sequencing of that 2-year critical path to get us that delivery. When we're in agreement with the sequence, the acquisition approach, then we'll be able to finalize cost estimates and schedule. We also, on a parallel path, are looking at what more do we need to know, and how do we sequence the additional tail wall inspections with the funding we have available to answer those questions, and can we then project out to the 2015-2016 time frame and see a big picture solution for the North Extension recovering from the damage. So we won't have the whole answer right away, but we expect to have at least a 2-year critical path schedule and cost estimate very soon.
I think that'll probably be the topic of our next meeting. How does that sound?
Yeah, I would think a goal of if we meet again in a month or two, we would have better information on that.
We'll shoot for March. That's okay with you?
That's fine. Yeah.
All right, anything else? Thank you, everybody for coming today. Appreciate everyone's participation and information. We're adjourned.